While the scent of flowers still perfumed the chapel and my son's coffin had just been closed, Veronica, the ex-wife who had left him 15 years earlier, entered. Wearing high heels and a tight dress, she walked down the aisle demanding the $24 million in his inheritance as if she were entitled to it. But what happened next exposed every person in that room and sparked a battle she never expected to lose. When the chapel doors opened that gray afternoon, my heart was already more broken than I thought possible. My son's coffin, polished and solemn, rested on the altar, surrounded by arrangements of white flowers, his favorites. The hymn he loved had just echoed for the last time through the stained glass windows, leaving a heavy silence that seemed to swallow every breath in the room. It was in that sacred moment of grief that she appeared. Veronica Pike entered the chapel as if she were arriving for a business meeting, not the funeral of the man she had abandoned 15 years earlier. The click of her 4-inch heels brutally broke the silence, causing everyone present to turn around. Her black dress, too elegant for the occasion, hugged her body like a second skin. But it was her smile, that calculated cornered smile, that chilled my blood. "I'm here to reclaim what's mine," she announced in a clear, rehearsed voice, projecting it so everyone could hear. "The $24 million my husband left behind. As his legal wife, I have every right to it." The air was sucked from the chapel. Some gasped, others turned in a daze to their fellow pewmates, but I didn't turn around to look at her. Not yet. I kept my eyes fixed on my son's coffin, on the softly glowing brass plaque bearing his name. He hadn't even been lowered into the ground, and already she was there like a vulture, trying to pluck away what was left of him. It wasn't sadness I felt in that moment. It was an intense heat rising in my chest, tightening my throat. A silent fury that settled heavily behind my ribs. My late husband used to say, I had the patience of a stone wall. That day, I needed every shred of that patience. Veronica's young lawyer was at her side, visibly nervous, flipping through papers in a blue folder. His voice trembled as he mentioned terms like marital status, survivorship rights, and some clause I clearly hadn't read carefully enough. I didn't even know she'd signed away all her rights in the divorce settlement years before. I looked to my left where Sophia Serra, my lawyer, was already discreetly pulling a folder from her purse. She gave me a small nod. "It's not time yet. Just wait," her gaze told me. The whispers had begun to spread through the chapel like a wave. Veronica's entrance not only broke the silence, it shattered the illusion of peace I had tried to maintain that day. The mourners shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Some stared at the floor, unable to witness the spectacle. Others looked at me, waiting for me to crumble to break under this affront. But I didn't. Slowly, I turned to face her. Veronica didn't hesitate when our eyes met. There was a cold confidence in her gaze, the kind that only exists in people who believe they've won before the battle even begins. She lifted her chin, slightly proud of herself. Maybe she expected me to beg, cry, or make a scene at the altar. But I remained motionless, and that seemed to unsettle her, because her voice grew louder, more insistent. "I'm not here to fight. I'm here to take what's rightfully mine." I finally spoke, my voice colder than hers, perfectly controlled. "You're not his wife. Not anymore." For a second, she hesitated. Her lawyer whispered something, turning a page in his documents, but I could see it on his face. She hoped I didn't know the law. She hoped I'd be too distraught to react. She thought this funeral was her stage, and that I'd be too broken to fight back. It was then that Sophia stepped forward, silent as a shadow, and handed the church official a copy of the divorce decree. Sealed, authenticated. The total waiver of any future property claims had been finalized more than a decade ago. I didn't need to say anything else. The truth was there, printed in official ink, and the silence that followed was more deafening than any shout. Someone coughed nervously. Another murmured, God help us. Veronica stood still, her lips pursed, her eyes scanning the chapel pews. She was waiting for someone to stand up for her. No one did. And I stood there, not triumphant, not arrogant, just steadfast. I spent 15 years raising my son alone after she left him with nothing but medical bills and a broken heart. I was there for every radiation therapy session, every surgery, every late-night call, when the pain came faster than the medications could keep up. She was absent, completely gone, until it was worth the money to return. When I finally turned to leave the chapel, I didn't look back. I walked toward the exit with Sophia at my side, our steps slow and even as if we were marching toward a battle that had just begun. I heard someone whisper my name sympathetically. Another said, "Justice." But I didn't need sympathy. I didn't want justice. Not yet. Because I knew this wasn't over. Not even close. What was to come would make the funeral seem like just a prelude. Outside, the wind had picked up whipping dry leaves around the stone steps. Sophia caught up with me and silently handed me a brown envelope. I tucked it under my arm without a word. We both knew I would need it very soon. The funeral director met us on the sidewalk, clearly distraught, to apologize for the interruption. I told him not to worry. "Death doesn't always bring dignity," I replied. He didn't know what to say after that, and I didn't need him to. We got in the car. Sophia drove. I sat in the passenger seat staring out the window, hands clasped, breathing slowly, not calmly, just controlled. There's a difference. It took us exactly 11 minutes to reach the SER and Associates office in the city center. Sophia's assistant had already set up the conference room, closing the door behind us and securing it with a soft click that seemed to seal out the outside world. Sophia placed 2 documents on the dark wooden table and smoothed them out with precise hands. The first was my son's last updated will, dated 9 months before he died. I was sitting next to him when he signed it. His hands slender but steady. In the document, he left all his assets to me: money, company stock, property insurance, even the intellectual property rights to the app he had designed in his final months. There was no mention of Veronica, not a single line. The second document was the divorce agreement from 15 years ago, a complete and authenticated waiver of future rights to any current or future assets. Sophia had the certified copy in hand, along with the notary's record. Without cracks, without ambiguity, Sophia's voice was measured when she spoke. "Veronica has nothing to lean on, but she's bold. I hope this escalates." I nodded. My jaw clenched, not out of fear, but out of absolute focus. If Veronica wanted to turn this into a war, I'd find her on the front lines. I'd cried for my son with every part of my being. Now I would defend what he left behind. I wouldn't allow a woman who disappeared for 15 years to turn the final chapter of his life into a legal circus. Sophia handed me a copy of the inventory of his assets, carefully listed by category. I glanced through it quickly. Bank accounts, company stock, the lake house, the apartment, even the car. Then I saw the last item, a private video letter recorded by my son and stored digitally under attorney protection. I didn't know he'd done that. Sophia slammed the folder down with determination. "It's time." We drove to the courthouse, not for a formal hearing, but for a meeting Sophia had scheduled with the judge in charge of emergency probate proceedings. A courtesy granted due to the size of the estate and the obvious tension surrounding it. He agreed to review the files in advance and confirm that Veronica's claims would be declared invalid immediately upon filing. A temporary protection order on the assets was issued within an hour, a record even for Sophia, who rarely showed surprise, but she raised her eyebrows slightly when the document arrived so quickly. As we left, the sky had darkened. The clouds were closing in like a curtain before a storm. Sophia's phone rang as we stood on the courthouse steps. It was Veronica's lawyer. She answered on speakerphone, allowing me to hear every word. His voice cracked as he asked for a meeting to discuss a possible joint resolution. Sophia responded with a familiar professional detachment. All conversations were to be in writing, and Veronica's interference in a church service would be included in any formal response. I didn't speak during the call. I didn't need to. I spent years remaining silent for peace, for my son, for my family. That time had ended the moment Veronica said $24 million in front of his coffin. That night at home, I opened the private video letter. My son was sitting in the chair near the window, the same chair we used to read together when he was just a child. His voice was calm, his tone clear and firm, despite his obvious physical weakness. He talked about the foundation he wanted me to build, the community. Scholarships, the memorial garden behind the technology lab. He talked about me, about how I supported him, about the strength he hoped I would continue to demonstrate even after he was gone. Then, near the end, he said something I'll never forget. If she comes back, I need you to stand your ground, not just for me, but for yourself. She walked away from me, but you, Mom, you never did. You deserve everything I left you. I chose you. I played that last part twice, letting the weight of those words settle on my chest like a hand pressing firmly but tenderly. I didn't cry. Not that night. There would be time for that later. Now I had a decision to make. I opened my desk drawer and took out a notepad. I wrote down 3 names. 3 people who supported my son when Veronica wouldn't. 3 people who witnessed things, who knew things. One of them had access to hospital records. Another had archived the development contracts. The third possessed personal emails that were never disclosed. This wasn't revenge. It was about protection. I wouldn't let her rewrite her story, not while I had breath in my lungs, not while I still had his voice in my ears. The next morning, the news spread. Not about the money. That would come later. But about what happened in the church. About Veronica's entrance. About the confrontation. About the silence that followed. My phone rang before dawn. Old neighbors, distant cousins, people I hadn't heard from in years calling to ask how I was. But beneath the concern, I could hear something else. Curiosity, hesitation, a slight questioning tone in their voices, as if they weren't sure which side of the story to believe yet. The first was my son's last updated will, dated 9 months before he died. I was sitting next to him when he signed it, his hands slender but steady. In the document, he left all his assets to me. Money company, stock, property, insurance, even the intellectual property rights to the app he had designed in his final months. There was no mention of Veronica, not a single line. The second document was the divorce agreement from 15 years ago, a complete and authenticated waiver of future rights to any current or future assets. Sophia had the certified copy in hand, along with the notary's record. Without cracks, without ambiguity, Sophia's voice was measured when she spoke. Veronica has nothing to lean on, but she's bold. I hope this escalates. I nodded, my jaw clenched not out of fear, but out of absolute focus. If Veronica wanted to turn this into a war, I'd find her on the front lines. I'd cried for my son with every part of my being. Now, I would defend what he left behind. I wouldn't allow a woman who disappeared for 15 years to turn the final chapter of his life into a legal circus. Sophia handed me a copy of the inventory of his assets, carefully listed by category. I glanced through it quickly. Bank accounts, company stock, the lake house, the apartment, even the car. Then I saw the last item, a private video letter recorded by my son and stored digitally under attorney protection. I didn't know he'd done that. Sophia slammed the folder down with determination. It's time. We drove to the courthouse not for a formal hearing, but for a meeting Sophia had scheduled with the judge in charge of emergency probate proceedings. a courtesy granted due to the size of the estate and the obvious tension surrounding it. He agreed to review the files in advance and confirm that Veronica's claims would be declared invalid immediately upon filing. A temporary protection order on the assets was issued within an hour, a record even for Sophia, who rarely showed surprise, but she raised her eyebrows slightly when the document arrived so quickly. As we left, the sky had darkened. The clouds were closing in like a curtain before a storm. Sophia's phone rang as we stood on the courthouse steps. It was Veronica's lawyer. She answered on speakerphone, allowing me to hear every word. His voice cracked as he asked for a meeting to discuss a possible joint resolution. Sophia responded with a familiar professional detachment. All conversations were to be in writing, and Veronica's interference in a church service would be included in any formal response. I didn't speak during the call. I didn't need to. I spent years remaining silent for peace, for my son, for my family. That time had ended the moment Veronica said $24 million in front of his coffin. That night at home, I opened the private video letter. My son was sitting in the chair near the window, the same chair we used to read together when he was just a child. His voice was calm, his tone clear and firm, despite his obvious physical weakness. He talked about the foundation he wanted me to build the community. Scholarships, the memorial garden behind the technology lab. He talked about me, about how I supported him, about the strength he hoped I would continue to demonstrate even after he was gone. Then, near the end, he said something I'll never forget. If she comes back, I need you to stand your ground, not just for me, but for yourself. She walked away from me, but you, Mom, you never did. You deserve everything I left you. I chose you. I played that last part twice, letting the weight of those words settle on my chest like a hand pressing firmly but tenderly. I didn't cry, not that night. There would be time for that later. Now I had a decision to make. I opened my desk drawer and took out a notepad. I wrote down 3 names, 3 people who supported my son when Veronica wouldn't, 3 people who witnessed things, who knew things. One of them had access to hospital records. Another had archived the development contracts. The third possessed personal emails that were never disclosed. This wasn't revenge. It was about protection. I wouldn't let her rewrite her story, not while I had breath in my lungs. Not while I still had his voice in my ears. The next morning, the news spread. Not about the money. That would come later. But about what happened in the church. About Veronica's entrance. About the confrontation. About the silence that followed. My phone rang before dawn. Old neighbors, distant cousins, people I hadn't heard from in years calling to ask how I was. But beneath the concern, I could hear something else. Curiosity, hesitation, a slight questioning tone in their voices, as if they weren't sure which side of the story to believe yet. I had saved it as a draft. It said, "Mom, if you're reading this, I'm already gone. And if she shows up, I know it'll be hard, but I need you to remember that you're the only one who stayed. You were there when I couldn't walk, when I couldn't sleep, when I was more tubes than skin. You never left the room, so don't let her rewrite what you and I lived through. I chose you, not her, never her." It was at that moment that my doubt disappeared. It wasn't that I had planned to give up, but something inside me calmed down. I had carried pain and anger all week. Now I had clarity. Veronica wanted to use public opinion as a weapon. I would expose the truth not only in court, but in front of every person who had seen her post and believed the lie. 3 days after the funeral, I entered the town hall through the back entrance. Sophia had arranged it that way. Less noise, fewer eyes. The auditorium was already filling up with people. Local press tech investors, community leaders. The mayor's office had confirmed their presence not to give a speech, but to show support. That mattered more. The event was simple on paper. A dedication, the public launch of the Holbrook Memorial Foundation. But we all knew it was more than that. It was a message. The chairs were arranged in rows in front of a projection screen. A banner hung near the front. A legacy of purpose. My son's face was in the program, smiling in that understated way he always had when he was proud but didn't want attention. That smile would speak for him now. Sophia and Jimena took care of the press check-in. Miguel was positioned near the side table with legal folders. Daniel, the nurse, offered to escort the older guests. Everyone had a role to play. Everyone understood what was at stake. At 10:02, the doors closed. At 10:05, Sophia stepped up to the podium and tapped the microphone once. She didn't smile. She wasn't there to charm anyone. Good morning. We're here to honor the vision and values of a man who lived with brilliant discretion and left a plan to make an impact. What you'll see today isn't about loss. It's about intention, about clarity, about truth. She stepped away and the lights went out. The screen lit up with a video dated 5 weeks before his death. My son was sitting in a chair, his shoulders slightly hunched, his eyes tired but focused. The background was his home office, the one filled with books, plants, and photos I knew by heart. His voice was calm but firm. If you're watching this, then I'm no longer around, but I wanted to explain in my own words why I made the decisions I made. I didn't want any confusion. He didn't want any arguments. He wanted the truth to speak for itself. He went on to describe his illness, his hopes for the foundation, his decision to leave his assets to me and me alone, his reasons. They weren't emotional, they weren't vengeful, just measured and clear. She was gone, he said without hesitation. When he needed her most, she wasn't there. And when I built something worth coming back to, she came back. I can't let that define my legacy. I'm choosing the person who never left. The room fell silent as the video ended. No coughing, no movement, just stillness. I stood up, not because I wanted to, but because I had to. I walked slowly to the podium, feeling the weight of all the eyes. I had spoken in classrooms for 30 years. I had given eulogies, birthday toasts, and retirement speeches. But this moment was different. It wasn't about celebration. It was about drawing a definitive line in the sand. I thanked everyone for being there. I acknowledged the mayor's presence. Then I read the names of the first scholarship recipients. I read the names of the local schools that would receive technology support. I described the emergency medical aid fund that would be named after my son. The audience listened attentively. No one interrupted, so I addressed the situation directly. Some of you may have seen online posts, heard rumors, read comments. I won't respond to gossip. I'll respond with evidence. Jimena dimmed the lights again. The screen displayed emails from my son labeled Dated Verified Communications with Sophia, with Jimena, with me. They documented his intentions, his revised estate plans, his canceled insurance beneficiary designations. Everything. The undisputed basis of the facts. Then came the digitized legal documents, the divorce decree, the signed agreement, the waiver of rights. Highlighted in yellow was the line where Veronica signed her full consent to waive any future claims. Finally, the last slide. A screenshot of an email Veronica had sent to a close friend 6 weeks before the funeral. The message had been forwarded anonymously to Sophia's office. In it, Veronica wrote, "I don't care what it costs. I'm coming back to take what should be mine." He owed it to me. And if your mother wants a war, I'm ready. I looked at the audience. That was her story. This is mine. And this foundation, this work, this legacy belongs to the man who earned it, not to the one who left it, not the one who returned when the headlines appeared. Some people applauded, then some more. When I returned from the podium, the entire room was applauding. I didn't smile. I didn't bow. I just nodded once and returned to my seat. Veronica was there. I'd seen her arriving late. She sat in the back row wearing sunglasses, her lips pursed. When the lights came back on, she got up and left. She didn't make a scene. She didn't speak. But her heels clicked loudly against the floor as she walked away, as if she wanted to be heard, as if she wanted someone to chase her. No one did. Sophia leaned toward me. She's going to fight back. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. Let her try, and we'd be ready. After the event ended, people came up to me, shook my hand, and told me stories about my son that I'd never heard before. A college classmate, a mentor from a tech incubator, a father whose son had received free lessons on the app. My son built his senior year. That afternoon, a photo from the event appeared on the news. I stood at the podium, one hand on the lectern, the other holding the program. My son's face on the screen beside me. The caption read, "A mother protects her son's legacy." And that was exactly what I had done. Publicly, clearly, without shouting, without anger, but with each action sharp as a blade. The next morning, I woke up to silence. No new messages, no missed calls, no emails from Sophia. But I didn't mistake the stillness for peace. It was the kind of silence that comes before something breaks. At 8:30, Sophia sent me a single message. "Stay off social media." Her tone was always controlled, but I could sense the urgency behind those 4 words. I obeyed, but I didn't need to wonder for long. Jimena called 30 minutes later. Veronica posted something. A video clip, cutouts of my son taken out of context. It made it sound like he regretted changing the will. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. The event at City Hall had shaken her. Now she was playing dirty. That afternoon, Sophia and I met again in the same private room in the old bank building. She'd already downloaded the clip, made a backup, transcribed it, and had a team verify her edits. There was no complete footage to match, no record of those words in any raw file. It was a fabrication, but it was subtle enough to fool the people who wanted to believe her. Sophia turned her laptop screen toward me and pressed play. My son's voice came through, but the sentences were cut, rearranged, and the pauses were eliminated. He seemed uncertain, overwhelmed. Then Veronica's voice overlapped. She spoke gently with false sympathy, but every word implied that I had manipulated my son to exclude her. She had even titled the video, "Let the Truth Be Heard." It was already being shared across the internet. Comments quickly shifted. Strangers called her brave. Others called me greedy. Some suggested I had isolated my son during his illness, alienated his friends, cut off contact with his ex-wife out of jealousy. Lies grow fast in the right soil, but we didn't panic. Sophia already had the next move planned. The first part of Sophia's plan was simple. We would release the full video in question, the untouched, time-stamped version, recorded in a single take. Miguel had the original on a secure drive protected by passwords and authentications that proved its integrity. The second part required more coordination. By the end of that day, Jimena had managed to secure permission from 3 of my son's former business partners to share internal communications, archived emails, meeting notes, and messages from my son, expressing his disappointment with Veronica's behavior over the years. In a message dated 2 years before his death, he wrote, "She reached out again not to inquire about my health, not to apologize, just to find out if the IPO had been completed. I'm tired of pretending people care when they don't. I don't have the energy for this anymore." Sophia gathered all of this into a meticulously organized and labeled behavioral pattern documentation package. Clean, professional, devastating in its simplicity. The next morning, we held a press conference. It wasn't flashy, no elaborate podium, no dramatization, just a conference room with a projector and printed packets for everyone in attendance. Sophia opened with a single sentence that resonated throughout the room. Misinformation is dangerous. Here's the truth. We've replayed the full original video below. My son's unedited message, calm, clear, confident. He explained his decisions without hesitation, without confusion. He named me as his sole enforcer, his sole caregiver, his only remaining family. We distributed the evidence in writing. We allowed time for questions. We didn't offer any cliches. We didn't create narrative twists. We simply presented undisputed facts. Veronica didn't respond publicly, but she didn't need to. The damage to her credibility was already visible. That evening, one of the community blogs that had previously praised her issued a quiet retraction. Another removed the doctored video of her. A third posted transcripts side by side, showing how the clip had been altered. Still, it wasn't enough. Not for me. The facts were on my side, but I wasn't just chasing facts. I was chasing absolute clarity. So, I made a decision. I called Jimena and asked her to release the internal memo my son had written during his last hospitalization. It had been intended for the company's board of directors, but the tone was deeply personal. The memo detailed his plan for the foundation, his reasons for creating it in my name, and his desire to distance the organization from anyone who had abandoned him. In the end, he wrote, "I don't want my name used for anything fake, anything superficial. If people are going to remember me, let it be for what I really did and who really supported me." Sophia hesitated before agreeing. It was a powerful piece, but it would also stir things up again. I told her that was precisely the goal. The memo was released at noon with the board's consent and endorsed by the foundation. It didn't attack Veronica directly. He didn't mention her by name, but he exposed every lie she'd told simply by existing like a ray of light, dispelling shadows. At night, I began receiving messages. Strangers, survivors of serious illnesses, caregivers, people who had watched loved ones die slowly and alone. They wrote to say they understood. They believed me. They'd seen people show up too late just to claim something they hadn't earned. But even that didn't satisfy me completely, because Veronica wasn't finished. At 10:30 that night, Sophia called me again. She filed a motion to contest the will. She claimed my son was coerced. She claimed he wasn't mentally competent when he made the final changes. I asked Sophia how strong that claim was. "Weak," she replied, "but it will force a formal response. It will initiate discovery. It will open records." I told her I wasn't afraid of the searches. Let her finish, because the deeper she goes, the more she'll uncover the truth she was trying to bury. This wasn't just about a lie anymore. It was about character. And character has a greater impact than money. The motion came late on a Thursday. Sophia forwarded the document to me at 9:42 p.m., exactly as I knew she would. Clean, annotated with a short note at the bottom. "You don't need to reply yet, but you should see this." I read every page with meticulous attention. Veronica's legal team accused me of undue influence. They claimed that my son had been emotionally manipulated, that I had isolated him, that I had coerced him into rewriting the will when his mind was clouded by medication and illness. They called me controlling, oppressive, relentless. I sat alone at the kitchen table, the same table where I used to spread out science projects and vocabulary cards, the same table where I had shaved my son's head after his first round of chemotherapy, trying to make him laugh as the hair came out in clumps. Now that table held an accusation that I had stolen from him. I had bent him to my will. I had used his pain for my own benefit. I allowed myself to feel it fully. Not the anger, Not yet. The pain. It settled in my chest like something old returning, something heavy, something I thought I'd made peace with. That pain returned that night because reading that accusation was like reliving every hour I'd sat beside him. Every time I held a vomit bag in one hand and his fingers in the other, every time I pressed the morphine button when the nurse didn't arrive quickly enough, they called me relentless. But they weren't there when I read to him while he was nauseous. When I changed his sheets at 3 a.m., when I massaged his feet so he could sleep. They weren't there the night he woke up screaming and couldn't remember what year it was. They weren't there the afternoon he asked me clearly and with full capacity to make sure she never received a cent. I was, so I let the weight settle. I didn't fight it. I didn't push it away. I poured myself a glass of water. I stood still, perfectly still, as I let the words wash over me, and I reminded myself exactly who I was. Not the woman they described on paper, but the mother who stayed. The next morning, I met with Sophia in her office. She had already drafted our initial response, but before registering anything, we sat in silence for a while. She watched me as if she was waiting for me to cave in or explode in anger or collapse in tears. I did none of those things. I just said, let's do it cleanly. Let's make it final. She nodded with a small smile of approval. We agreed to prepare a full affidavit, Daniel's testimony as a nurse, Jimena's statement as CFO, Miguel's authenticated records. We would include the entire email chain documenting my son's requests, his voice recording his personal memo, everything. But I didn't want the next step to be just legal. I needed something more. I told Sophia I wanted to write a letter, not to the court, but to the foundation, to the community. She hesitated briefly, but agreed. That weekend I sat down with a pen and wrote by hand. I kept it simple. I'm not my son's voice, but I am the echo of what he believed in. He believed in justice, in decency, in the truth that doesn't need to shout to be heard. He built what he built not for fame or legacy, but because he wanted to solve a problem, to leave something useful behind. I stayed by his side. I didn't do it for reward. I didn't do it for recognition. I did it because I loved him and because I believe in what he wanted this foundation to be. The following week, Sophia filed the full rebuttal. It was longer than the original motion, more detailed, more substantial, and with irrefutable documentation. So, we waited. During that time, Veronica did exactly what I expected. She went to the press, gave interviews, and played the role of the inconsolable widow. She spoke of love, memory, and heartbreak. She shared carefully curated photos. She cried when the cameras demanded it. But something had changed. The public was no longer so sure. Some articles began using the word alleged before her allegations. Commentators began referring to the full video, the emails, and the glaring contradictions between what she said and what the documents showed. The truth doesn't always move quickly, but it moves steadily and relentlessly. Sophia told me it could take weeks for the judge to review the motion. She warned me that Veronica might push for a hearing to delay things, try to wear us down over time. I told her I wasn't worried because I'd waited for worse. I'd waited for blood tests and biopsy results and the sound of machines beeping in the middle of the night. Waiting for court dates and document reviews didn't scare me. Unlike watching your child languish day after day, hour after hour. During those days of waiting, I kept busy. I spent my mornings in the foundation office reviewing grant proposals, meeting with the new director, and assembling evaluation panels. I made sure the work was moving forward. I kept my hands busy so my heart wouldn't be overwhelmed by the weight of waiting. One afternoon, while I was reviewing budget reports, a volunteer came in with a letter. It was handwritten with no return address. Inside was a simple message. You're not alone. I believe you. I saw my sister destroyed by someone like her. Thank you for speaking up. There was no signature, just those few lines. That reminded me that what we were doing wasn't just about ownership or inheritance. It was about setting the record straight. Not with fire, but with focus. Not with volume, but with unquestionable truth. This was what Veronica never understood. She thought power came from noise, from dramatic accusations. But I had learned that real power comes from consistency, and I would be consistent to the end. The decision came on a Wednesday morning. It was discreet, without television, without camera crews, without headlines screaming about justice or fraud, just a notification from Sophia that the court had issued its decision. She had forwarded the official copy to my inbox. 212 pages. I read them all. The motion to contest the will was dismissed outright without a trial or hearing. The judge had found the evidence clear and convincing. My son had full mental capacity. He had made his decisions deliberately. There was no sign of coercion, manipulation, or external pressure. Veronica's allegations were described as unfounded, speculative, and in several instances intentionally misleading. That last sentence mattered more than all the others. Intentionally misleading. In courtroom language, that meant more than just losing. It meant exposure. It meant vulnerability. It meant consequences. The next step moved faster than even Sophia expected. Within 48 hours, the court ordered a hearing to review possible sanctions against Veronica's legal team for misuse of process abuse of the system and attempting to deceive a probate court with altered materials. The hearing was scheduled for the following week. Initially, I didn't plan to attend. I told myself the rejection was enough, that I didn't need to see the consequences, that I already had what I came for. My son's wishes protected his legacy intact. But 2 days before the hearing, Sophia called. Veronica had submitted a last-minute request. She wanted the hearing closed to the public, citing emotional distress, claiming it would harm her reputation and interfere with her ability to find work and rebuild her life. The judge denied her request. That's when I decided I'd be there, sitting in the back row, silently witnessing the end of this story. I arrived early on the day of the hearing. The courtroom was small, with no media present, just the parties, their lawyers, and a few court employees. Sophia sat next to me, her posture relaxed but alert. Veronica walked in 5 minutes before the start time, wearing a navy blue suit that was overly formal for the setting. Her hair was tied back in a messy bun. She didn't look around the room. She knew I was there, but she didn't face me. The judge walked in. The hearing began without ceremony, without drama, without theatrics, just a methodical analysis of what had happened. They reviewed the motion Veronica had filed, the video she had posted, the way it had been edited, the sworn statement that contradicted her version of events. They analyzed financial records, legal history, the pattern of her communication with people close to my son, the timing of her appearance, her statements on social media before and after the funeral. They tore everything apart piece by piece, exposing every contradiction. Her lawyer tried to argue that she had been misled, that she hadn't fully understood the risks, that she had acted out of pain. But the judge interrupted him with words I'll never forget. The pain of losing a man she abandoned does not excuse this court's manipulation. At the end of the hearing, it became clear that the sanctions would be severe. Veronica's attorney would face a formal review by the state attorney's office. She would be required to pay the legal fees associated with responding to her fraudulent motion. The amount was considerable. The court issued a freeze on her pending payment. It wasn't prison. It wasn't a national scandal, but it was the legal version of a settling of scores. The truth finally taking its toll. I watched her face as the judge read the decision. Her expression didn't change, not once. But her hands betrayed her apparent calm, clenching and releasing one after the other in a nervous rhythm. When the judge closed the hearing, Sophia and I stood up. We didn't approach Veronica. We didn't linger. But as we walked toward the exit, she turned slightly. Not enough to make eye contact, but enough for me to see the blank look in her eyes. She'd entered this battle thinking she could bend reality to her will. She emerged with her name smeared in official court records, her finances frozen, her story revealed as a web of lies. That afternoon, Sophia sent a statement to the Foundation's press contacts. Brief, professional. The Holbrook Foundation respects the court's findings and remains committed to carrying out the mission outlined by its founder. We consider this matter resolved. Without triumphalism, without a tone of revenge, just finality. I sat in my garden that evening alone on the same bench where my son once sat after his first clean exam and breathed in the tranquility. Not complete peace, not yet, but the tranquility that comes after a door finally closes. In the following weeks, the foundation flourished. We received more offers for partnerships than we could accept. The first scholarship recipients were already being selected. The memorial garden behind the lab was beginning to take shape. As for Veronica, she disappeared from public life as completely as she had disappeared from my son's life 15 years earlier. No more publications, no more interviews, no more letters or emails or attempts at contact. One day, I received some mail, a plain envelope with no return address, just my name on the front. Inside, there was no letter, just an old photo of my son as a child, and a piece of paper with a single word on it. Sorry. I didn't respond. There was no need. That chapter was closed not with a shout or a celebration, but with the calm certainty of someone who protected what mattered. I still receive letters from women I've never met, from daughters, watching their mothers suffer, from mothers, watching their sons become strangers. They don't ask for magic, just truth, and I give it to them simple and unwavering. You are not alone. You never were. Your story doesn't end with abandonment. You can draw the line. You can pick up the pen again. And even if the world never applauds, your piece is the most important applause.